Yawn is so excited to be joined by Huma Qureshi to discuss her new book, Things We Do Not Tell the People We Love. It was so good. Honestly, I really, really enjoyed reading it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And this is your third book published now. So what made you decide it was time to write another book?
Well, I had always wanted to write fiction. That had been my kind of burning secret writerly ambition ever since I was from years and years ago, ever since I was a child, really. I just wanted to write books, but my previous two books were both non-fiction.
Yeah.
And in the summer of 2019, I just felt this incredible urgency to start writing these short stories. Now, I used to, although my previous books were non-fiction, I'd been writing fiction in sort of secret behind the scenes. I worked as a journalist, and I'd still be sort of taking evening classes and creative writing classes and things like that. So, but I never really talked to anyone about them or showed anyone the work that I did. So it reached a point really in my life where I had been not doing as much writing as I'd have liked. I just simply didn't have the headspace for it. I have 3 children in the space of a relatively short space of time. There's not big age gaps between them. So I think when my youngest came to an age where he was able to go to nursery, it suddenly felt like, oh my gosh, I've got some time again. And the only thing I wanted to do with that was write. And I was very, very hungry for it. And I kind of put this expectation on myself that I had to make it happen, and I wanted it to happen, and I wanted it to be published, and I wanted to find an agent, and I had these. I was very, very driven, and I kind of look back now, like as I was saying, like now I feel really exhausted, and I don't know where that sort of sense of energy came from, other than I saw this opportunity that I would have these windows of time in which to write, because for the first time in a long time, I would have no children at home for even just a couple of hours, 3 times a week. And then that urgency just drew me forward. I think I was itching to write. And in all that time, I've been obviously a massive reader. So it was like all these ideas had just been swimming around in my head without me even really realizing either. And then when I sat down to write, there they were.
They all just came. Were you specifically drawn to writing short stories? Was that kind of part of that hunger, was to write these perfectly encapsulated short stories?
Yeah, so as a reader, I'd always loved the short story form. I guess ever since I was at university, I suppose that was the first time I really encountered short stories, because you don't really study them at school. You don't really, I wasn't really aware of just picking up collections and reading them until I got to university, when we would, look at texts more critically, and obviously do a whole short stories module or whatever. And that kind of introduced me to it. And I really loved the way that they hit me in a way that maybe a novel didn't always. And it's not to discredit a novel. I just think you can't really compare the two. What I loved so much about the short story form was how intense it was, and yet how short it was in space of time, but the depth that it would go to and the emotional journey that it could take you on was quite something. And I was fascinated by that. I was fascinated by it. It's almost like comparing watching an episode of something compared to a long feature length film or something like that. Like there's something so clever about the way that you are left wanting more, or it kind of haunts you, or you maybe remember an episode more than you'd remember the ins and outs of a very long 2-hour film or something. So it was kind of like that. So I was always drawn to the short story form. And when I took my creative writing classes, it was very much around short story narrative. And so it seemed quite natural to me that was what I wanted to do. I read short story collections very hungrily. I love them, and I find it harder to read novels than I do short stories. And I don't know why that is. I think I don't know why that is, because you often hear people say the opposite. And I think people who haven't tried short stories assume that they can't get lost in them. So they think, oh, no, I can't read them. They're too short. I can't connect or whatever. But it's like, actually, you're probably reading the wrong ones, because the best short stories, you do make that connection. And they're so populated with emotion and feelings and characters. And also there's a certain simplicity as well that comes as well in the compressed narrative too. I mean, it doesn't have to come, but that's what I read in it, and that's what I take from it. And so I on the other hand find it much harder to stay sustained with a novel. Like, it really has to get me.
You in.
And so that's a challenge when I'm writing my novel now, because it's like I want to just be writing short stories, but I have to make it a novel instead. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely found, because I don't read short stories very often, and I found that the impact of how each individual story hits you, it does you kind of have to sit there for a while and almost absorb it. And I think, I totally agree that the impact of each short story was so great. I was wondering as well, so did you write them as a collection? Because they tie together so subtly but really strongly, of this kind of miscommunication between relationships. Did you write them knowing that was an integral theme you were going to have through a collection of short stories, or did you write them separately and then realize they were kind of bound together in this really strong but subtle way?
That's a really good question. So I started writing them one by one, and I didn't really consider them as a whole until I had enough stories there that I realized that actually they do connect together. I think the theme of miscommunication and intimacy and the secrets that we withhold from ourselves as much as we withhold from other people, I think those were just themes I was naturally drawn to. And so it was logical that those themes would appear in each of my stories in a certain way. I don't think I consciously thought it through that was the thread that connected them until I got to maybe the fourth story and realized that if I was to sit back and say, well, what are these stories about? It was clear to me that the strongest thread, like there was lots of different little bits of string, but the strongest one was about silence and intimate spaces and what we don't say and the unsaid. And that was when I realized that actually that's what I wanted to explore anyway. And so I think if I tried to write it as a collection from the outset, it might have felt perhaps a little bit forced. So I never I didn't really look at it as a whole collection until I'd written about 10 short stories and thought, this is going to sit together and they can sit together. And then I went back and sort of tried to make the thread a little bit stronger, but not so obvious. I don't know if you picked up on this, but like in some of the stories, the titles of the other stories appear. So like in the first story, which is called Premonition, she describes her world that she grew up in as waterlogged, and waterlogged becomes the title of another story. And I quite like that, that there's these little clues between them. And then in another story, Superstition, there's she makes reference to a girl that she's heard of, and that girl is the girl from the first story. So she's not someone that she massively knows, but she's just heard that she's living with this guy. And so it was just these little tiny little seeds, I guess, that I wanted to drop, which to me made them feel more connected. But I liked the fact that you may or may not notice. It just felt like, I love the idea that it's this almost like blink and you'll miss it sense to it. Like I love that. I find that kind of so, and I think that's so exciting to explore as well, the idea that if you did blink and you would miss that moment, and what would that mean in real life if someone made a gesture and you just didn't see, and it communicated something, and it maybe changed the intention of what they were trying to say, but you missed the moment and therefore you misinterpret them. And I think that's one of the themes of the book as well, is that all this misinterpretation between people that you would expect to know you better than you know yourself, your mother, your lover, your best friend, and yet there's this kind of invisible barrier between all of them. And I just find that fascinating for storytelling, and I really, really wanted to sort of play with that and let my imagination play with it.
That's so cool. So you were saying you started writing them in 2019.
Yes.
Did the writing process go through some of lockdown? Because I think those themes that you were talking about miscommunication and about these sort of silences and dips within relationships, I think it's such an interesting time for this to come out, because we've just gone through a period where we've all been separated from our loved ones, and we've had to kind of adapt the way we communicate with them. So were you writing it through that, and do you think that had an impact on how you wrote?
That's also such a good question. I actually finished writing it as like I suppose the draft collection by January 2020. So it was quite an intense writing period, because I did feel this real kind of energy to just write and to just keep going. And so I set myself that deadline. Actually, it was end of August, early September, and then my little boy went to nursery through to the end of December, early January. It was like the first term I was going to write this book, and I made myself write it. So it actually finished before the whole kind of first lockdown happened, because I think that was like end of February, March, when we started hearing news of it. But I guess the news of it was in the air. I can't say it was something I consciously thought of in the editing process, but I do think it's a really important sort of issue for today, because there is so much, like, you know, we all reverted to video calling our relatives or, you know, our parents or whoever we weren't able to live with. And I think that loses so much, and it's better than nothing. But you know, you think about, I was listening to a podcast recently, and it was talking about how those tiny interactions that you get when you go in to buy a cup of coffee, or you drop your kids off at school and you just nod and say hello to someone as you say, all of those things actually help our well-being without us even really knowing it. Just someone saying thank you when you pay for something, or you saying thank you, or just saying hello in a coffee shop to someone. And then all of those things have just disappeared. And I think you don't realize how much you need that communication. And then also just what's lost in communication and what's lost in the gestures. Is that something I really like to explore in my writing, is the subtle gestures that can say so much without actually using words. And it can be in a look or a tone or something that's just not said, or the way someone signs off their email, and how we interpret those things, and how we often maybe read more into them than we should. And what does that mean? And how does that help our understanding of relationships and things like that? So I guess that theme of communication is very much, or miscommunication is very much, something that was really important to me. And you're right that it's become much more prevalent now, hasn't it? That we think about those things in a way we didn't think about them before.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well. So in a lot of the stories you're writing, they're definitely two-way relationships, and there's issues of miscommunication that come from both directions, but we're only reading that one perspective of it. So obviously it's like incredibly clever, because you're, especially, so for example in the Too Much, where you just get this one overwhelming perspective and she cannot recognize the other side of it. Were you ever tempted to write the other side of it, or did you actually did you ever write the other side of it? And
I was tempted to write the other side of it, but I felt that the story had more capacity for feeling as heart-wrenching as it did if it only came from the one side. And I thought it was, and it's, that story in particular is one that, like, on social media and people, just readers who've read it, have said that's the one that got them, and that's the one that they wished there was more of. It's a story that's positioned in the sort of the heart of the book as well. It's the longest story as well, and I think if there was another perspective, it would have changed the tone of the story anyway, because there would have been two perspectives to it. But I think I really was only interested in the mother's perspective, partly because many of the other characters that I'd written were much younger women. And I really wanted to explore someone who had once been one of those girls. You know, she'd pushed her boundaries. She stood up for what she wanted in her life. And how did that play out for her? And then to see her in turn be a mother in a way that she thought was really cool, and just really this lovely mother who was never ever going to put boundaries on her daughter, basically, how that affected their relationship, and how badly could she have misinterpreted their relationship to have thought that actually they were best friends, and not having no perception of the fact that actually that was really suffocating. And I thought the delicacy in that story was because I didn't spell it out. So that was what I was trying to achieve, was to not spell it out. So that we're left wondering, well, why would her daughter just do that? I don't want to give it away, but like, you know, why would her daughter do what she did? And I think the tragedy is in the not knowing, in the not understanding, and in holding on to that sort of unpicking between the lines to see that actually what the mother saw as a lovely friendship with her daughter was actually quite intense and suffocating for the daughter, and that was the only way for it to go. And I felt like if I did write the daughter's perspective, perhaps we wouldn't feel perhaps the heartbreak of it wouldn't feel quite there, because I think one of the beauties of showing just one perspective is that we don't understand everything, and you don't have to understand everything, but it's how those feelings sort of leave you unsettled, and it leaves you as the reader with something that you have to come to terms with as much as the character in the story does. And I quite like the fact that you can play with that with perspective, because you can make people feel through one side of the story, if that makes any sense to me.
Definitely. And I definitely think when you're reading it, you do feel that, you feel like you want so badly to know the other side of the story, but I guess that's kind of the point, that the character doesn't know, and so as the reader, if we knew, it'd almost be besides the point.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I wanted to do with that story as well was, and I say this in a couple of the other stories as well, and I'm thinking of the story Summer, in which the grown-up daughter takes her mother on holiday with her. And as a sibling, they're very different relationships, but the thing I wanted to try and explore was this idea that there didn't have to be this one big explanation for why, you know, the daughter in Too Much decided to up and leave the way that she did. And in the story Summer, the daughter, the grown-up daughter, is trying to explain to her husband what it was like for her growing up, but she can't, because there's no one big moment of drama. And I wanted to explore that, because I think that's kind of what life is like. Like sometimes not everything is this big, massive, dramatic event or argument or fight and confrontation, and that's it, you'll never talk to them again. Sometimes it's much more subtle than that, and it is a case of lots of little things that build up over the years. Or in the case of Firecracker, the story about the two girls who were best friends, you just grow apart and there is no rhyme or reason to it, and it's just life. And I kind of wanted to explore that, because I felt like I hadn't seen that very much. I felt like, you know, there was always in those kind of, you know, in all the writing, in lots of the reading that I'd been doing, I'd find that, you know, there would be these big moments of confrontation, and I thought, well, what if you just quite simply fell apart? And that to me felt more true of life in a way, is what I wanted to do anyways, to explore how that would feel like for these characters if that was what happened, if there was no real explanation anyway. It's just one of those things, and it's just a really sad thing to have happened. And I don't know if that's maybe because that's the way I write as well, as that, and maybe I'm not that good with the big moments, and it's the smaller moments that I like to find meaning in, and so that was what I was trying to do as well.
And you were saying before that you sort of had this hunger to write these stories, and felt like you needed to get it out. What advice would you have for aspiring authors? Like, how do you sort of channel that feeling of wanting to write but kind of needing to get it down?
I think you have to allow yourself to do it, to spill it out, and you have to write. If you have that hunger and you feel that kind of intensity, you have to explore it, and you have to kind of trust your instinct. And trusting my instinct was a big part of writing those stories, because it's what gave me the self-belief that they were worth something exploring, because I had that seed of all the themes I wanted to explore, and I wasn't sure if it was going to work. And there were abandoned stories as well. I've got a whole Google Docs of abandoned half stories. It just didn't work. But I think the more you write, the more you begin to be able to trust your instincts and get a feel for what is flowing and what isn't, and where the narrative is working and where it isn't. And I think the first thing to do is to listen to that instinct. If you've got that hunger to start writing, you've got to listen to that voice and not just bat it aside or tell yourself, oh, that's silly, I can't possibly. You've got to allow yourself to listen to your instinct and get started in the first place. And then I think the more you write, the more you begin to understand what's true to you and what feels right to you, because you don't know until you start, really. And reading as well. Like, I'm not one, I know some writers say, like in interviews I've read with other people, they kind of put all other books on hold and don't read anything whilst they're writing. But I actually find there's no other way for me to write. So like my normal writing day will start with reading, and throughout the course of the day I will turn to lots of different books, because I feel like it keeps you in those moments where you feel like you've run out of energy, you've got nothing left to say, and you don't know how to string the sentence together anymore. It helps to lose yourself in somebody else's words, and it's like just taking a breather and having a moment of refresh, and it can really be really inspiring again, because I think the thing to do is to feel inspired rather than feel, oh my God, I could never write like that, what's the point of me even trying. It's more than looking at it critically and saying, well, how can I write like that? What has this author done that I like so much in that sentence? Is it the description? Is it the dialogue? Is it the simplicity? Or is there something else? And I think when you ask yourself those questions critically as you read, it can only inform your own writing. So I'd say listen to your instinct and do a hell of a lot of reading as well.
So you mentioned there you read as sort of almost not a way to decompress, but when you're worn out from writing, it kind of helps you regain that creativity. Is there anything else you do to unwind? If you've been writing all day, I'm sure it's a very stressful process, especially like the editing and going backwards and forwards. What's your go-to, this is me time, this is how I relax?
I'm gonna sound really like, I don't know if this is going to sound way too much like a homebody now, but like my absolute favorite thing, and this, I'm almost embarrassed to say it because it's so simple, but once my kids are in bed, that's the end of the day for me, because between finishing my work and finishing writing and then after school and all of that, the only real time that I'm alone is when I'm having a shower. And that's like my golden spot, is my very hot shower at the end of the day. I always wash my hair every night, and then I get changed into my PJs. And I do my skincare. I love doing all of that stuff. So that to me is like actually really precious, and I get really annoyed when I get interrupted doing all of that. And it's really only like, maybe half an hour in that space of to do all that. But that is without fail my nightly evening sort of wind down routine, the precursor to then, just sitting down with my husband and maybe watching a show and having something to eat and having a cup of tea, and the house is finally quiet and everyone's asleep. It's very precious. So that's my time. And I can't sleep properly if I haven't sort of done all that, if I haven't had that hot shower and I haven't spent time putting rosehip oil on and all that kind of stuff, like I really can't, like it really upsets me if I can't do it. So I think those are the things. I mean, we talk about that kind of thing, like in all the kids stuff, like, the importance of a routine with the children and things. So it's actually, I need the routine as well. And that's my moment for me. So getting into my PJs.
Amazing.
It's very appropriate, isn't it?
It is. What a perfect way to end it. Well, thank you so much for coming. Well, for virtually coming and sitting down with me. I really appreciate it. And best of luck with everything. And thanks again.
Thank you so much.